Flipper Baby Productions presents the Cinema Shame podcast.
You can feel for real as you kick up every heel. But no matter what you do, they're gonna take you down. Lord, it's a shamedown, blame town, tame down. Everybody wants another crowded line. All men, halt and faulting. You are busted. Let down your guard.
Welcome back to the Cinema Shame podcast, but after this episode, it might actually be time to rebrand this the podcast about boxing movies. My name is James Patrick, and I'm once again your ringside referee. My guest today is Travis Sentell. I've known Travis for, more than, 22 years now? It's insane.
Yep.
Yeah, we met at college at Emory University, and we created the greatest single original TV programming that campus has ever seen. He's gone on to become a screenwriter, author, and the host of the Does Your Favorite Movie Suck podcast. Welcome to Cinema Shame, Travis. What do you have to say for yourself?
Only apologies for the work I've created. I ask everyone's forgiveness for what I've done in this world. That's all I have to say.
That's a pretty broad apology.
Listen, if you get into specifics,
that's to come and has happened and.
Blanket apology. It's like at the Oscars. If you try to thank everybody, you end up forgetting someone. So you can't thank anyone. You can't thank anyone. You just have to say thank you to everyone, and I apologize for everything. I'm excited to be here.
That's important as a podcaster, I think.
Oh yeah. All we basically put things out into the ether, and we're grossly apologetic about doing so, and yet we persist, and yet we continue to do it.
I do. I feel bad about what I'm doing. It's just
you're a writer.
More talking. We're both writers and podcasters. So all we do is spew words into a world that does not need them.
Correct. Yeah. One thing this world definitely needs is more content, especially more podcasts from middle-aged white men. So happy to be here.
Are you saying we're now middle-aged?
I think definitionally we're middle-aged. Yeah. I'm not saying that. I think math is saying that. I'm not claiming it.
Okay. Because I certainly don't feel...
Are you 40? You're 40, right?
Yeah.
Fucking middle-aged, man.
Right. Yeah, we can argue that. We can't argue the white guy, though. That's pretty much just the way it is.
Yeah, that's what we do, though. In LA, it's funny because it's weird to meet someone without a tattoo and weird to meet someone without a podcast in Los Angeles. Just a thing that you expect everyone to have and or do.
Yeah, in Pittsburgh we have the tattoos, but the podcasts aren't quite as plentiful. Maybe you should podcast in Pittsburgh. It'd be more unique.
I'll just use a VPN and say we're coming out of Pittsburgh.
It's the same thing, really. Nobody cares.
Sure.
So I've been bugging you about Cinema Shame for a little while, and you came back to me with the fact that you had not seen the Martin Scorsese masterpiece. We'll call it a masterpiece. I think most people consider it a masterpiece. Raging Bull.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Why do you hate movies, and what do you have against poor Marty? Is it the LA New York thing? It's the LA New York thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like a East Coast West Coast beef that I have with him, just baked into my blood. Simple and complicated answer probably to that question. I have a real affection for transgressive fiction, and have my entire life. Like it's the form of literature I fell in love with most aggressively. I went and got my grad degree in creative writing at University of St. Andrews, and just fell in love with Trainspotting and Fight Club and Larry Brown and all these really old, even starting in some ways with American Psycho, like all these books about bad people. And I thought they were really interesting because it felt important to me somehow, that it was part of our psyche that we were suppressing and not talking about. Lolita, I guess, even going farther back to high school when I read that. And then I don't know why I made a schism where I read transgressive literature, but didn't really watch transgressive movies in the same way. And so I kind of missed the time period when I fell in love with that art form. I didn't watch a lot of movies that were in the same ballpark as the books I was reading, content-wise or style-wise. And then it became a thing where I just hadn't seen it. It became, I'm sure this is a thing you hear a lot on the podcast, but like a barrier gets built up around it because it's a thing you just haven't done. And very few people, you go, hey, you want to watch Raging Bull with me? And they go, I mean, if they're film lovers, they say, sure.
That's not good for parties, though. You know,
it's not good for parties and not good for hanging out. And so invariably
noise.
You're like, yeah, and you can't, it's not a good thing to put on a big screen at a party. And so I thought, well, I'm going to watch it alone in a room at some point, and that feels daunting to me. And so it just never happened. And so when you asked me to do this, I thought, well, that's the one I probably have to now watch because I have an excuse to watch it now, which was good. Also, I hate film. That's the other answer.
How are you on the rest of the Scorsese's filmography? Is this the outlier?
I'm middling. I'm pretty middling. I think I've seen most of. I didn't see his first one, the one that preceded Raging Bull, but I've seen. I think I should pull up his filmography. I think I've seen most of them actually, besides this one. This is definitely the big one I hadn't seen. Have you seen all of them?
I have not. I have
completist?
Not. I am not a Scorsese completist. There's a few that I haven't watched. I've seen almost all of the modern films. I think probably my weak area is his earliest work. Like I haven't seen Who's That Knocking at My Door or Boxcar Bertha.
Yep.
Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. And I haven't seen too many of his documentaries either, and there's a bunch of those.
I haven't seen the most recent one, which I'm really, really excited about. I don't know why I haven't seen it yet. But I will. I certainly will. The Bob Dylan one, Rolling Thunder Review. I haven't seen that yet. Yeah, but I've seen quite a substantial amount. I'm looking through right now. Yeah. Just to remind listeners, Hugo, Shutter Island, The Departed, The Aviator, Gangs of New York, Michael Jackson Video Greatest Hits History, for sure. I saw that. Casino, Cape Fear, Goodfellas, Last Temptation of Christ, Color of Money, King of Comedy, Last Waltz, Taxi Driver. Yeah, I've seen all those. So like a reasonable amount of Scorsese. But like this was the big one hanging out that I hadn't seen. Also, I hadn't seen Mean Streets. I should cop to that.
Yeah, that's one that you should probably get around to too. I mean, it's kind of the beginning of Scorsese proper.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, this may kick off like a good new Scorsese deep dive where I just knock off the ones I haven't seen, and maybe revisit. I want to watch. This made me really want to watch Taxi Driver again.
You talking to me?
Obviously, Schrader, De Niro.
There's a lot of connections between these two movies. We'll get back to that a little later too. We can talk a few nuts and bolts first, and then we'll swing back into the more interesting conversation.
The Bronx Bull, the Raging Bull. Let's hear for the great Jake LaMotta, ladies and gentlemen.
I'm the best. I can take him more than anybody.
You're dead, you're married. Leave the young girls for me.
There's no way I'm going down. I don't go down for nobody.
What is it with him? Why does he have to make it so hard on himself?
If you beat Sugar Ray, you'll get a shot at the title. You feel that way?
There's no one else around who wants to fight me. They're all afraid.
There's a lot of bad things, Joey. Maybe it's coming back to me.
You go with nuts and bolts because some people don't like the nuts and bolts, but as like
it's all I care about.
As film nerds, I feel like you want to know these things, right?
It's all I really care about.
And since I lost my page, I get to do the typey thing because it just disappeared. Right. So, Raging Bull was released on December 19th, 1980, made its premiere at November 14th, 1980, New York City. It cost a total of $18 million and returned 23.4, which isn't exactly gangbusters. The film was met with pretty wildly mixed reviews at the time. Roger Ebert gave it a perfect 4 out of 4 stars. Gary Arnold of the Washington Post called it, a ponderous work of metaphysical cinematic bull. Kathleen Carroll of the New York Daily News, here's another one I found interesting. There is no denying the emotional power of these scenes, but one wishes that Scorsese would end his Italian-American guilt trip and stop exposing mean-tempered, self-destructive characters like LaMotta, whose personality problems he apparently feels stem from their cultural environment. Raging Bull ultimately has a numbing effect on the brain, as if one's head had been pummeled by LaMotta's so-called girlish fists.
Disagree. Disagree with that review.
And you may have noticed in the interim, it's come around to be widely considered, if not Scorsese's finest film, among his best. In 1998, the AFI listed it as number 24, but on the 2007 10th anniversary list, it bumped it all the way up to number 4.
Wow.
I didn't check to see if that was the biggest jump, but I gotta believe it.
No,
for the purpose of this podcast, let's just say it was the biggest jump. It sounds better. Another anecdote that I found interesting was that Raging Bull owes its existence to Rocky, because Rocky made $1 bajillion. And UA was looking to greenlight another boxing movie when Scorsese came to them with the idea for Raging Bull. And then he somehow swindled them into believing that it was best to shoot it in black and white so that the film would stand out against the other boxing movies of the time, which included Rocky II, The Main Event, The Champ, and Matilda. Do you remember Matilda?
I don't remember Matilda. That's a boxing film?
Technically.
Okay.
We'll pause for a moment here so people can try and remember Matilda, but that's the boxing kangaroo, Matilda.
Oh, sure. Of course. The best of the boxing films.
Yes. The boxing kangaroo films, if nothing else.
Sure.
So because there were all these other boxing movies, UA said, yeah, sure, you should definitely film it in black and white so that it doesn't look like the rest of them.
Yeah, you do you, Marty. We'll be over here.
Now, you've been in these meetings. Can you just appreciate that kind of conversation?
It's wild. And also, like, Scorsese was on the ropes, no pun intended, but like he was not doing well in his career at this point, really. His last film, I understand, hadn't been a major success. So the idea that he would go for broke with this kind of movie and just throw it all in here, it feels desperate. It feels interestingly desperate. It's like, I'm doing what I want because this might be my last movie.
Yeah, before this, he had done the Last Waltz documentary, New York, New York, and Taxi Driver, which also didn't do extraordinarily well. But he believed this was actually going to be his last movie. So he was not going to sacrifice any of his artistic integrity, anything that he wanted to accomplish to satisfy the studio. He was going to go down in a blaze of glory, or a box office whimper, or I should say.
So great. What a boss.
He threatened to take his name off the film and refused to have it released when the studio came to them and demanded the final cut because he was in the middle of trying to fix one line of dialogue when Jake LaMotta orders a Cutty Sark at a bar. He decided that the dialogue wasn't intelligible, so he was trying to re-edit the sound. And the studio took it away from him. He had a conniption fit.
Wow.
He obviously decided that it was best just to let it go. You can, if you pay attention to the movie and hear that line, you can see why he was upset about it. There's just some ambient bar noise going on while he says it, so he was trying to isolate the dialogue away from the other noise, but it is sort of muffled. Not that anyone would ever care.
I love it. I love that he cares. I love it. I love it so much.
It's also kind of interesting how Scorsese got a hold of the project in the first place. It was Robert De Niro who read LaMotta's autobiography on the set of Godfather 2. Scorsese didn't want anything to do with it. He kept telling him he needed to make this as his next movie, but he didn't like sports. He said if it had a ball in it, he didn't want anything to do with it. And boxing he found rather repugnant. But after he almost died of a drug overdose, he came back to the project. He said that he related to the idea of Jake LaMotta and saw the boxing ring, as an allegory for anything you do in life. The man alone against his obstacles. Scorsese later said, when you make movies, you're in the ring each time.
Sure.
Then another little footnote that I found interesting. He showed the movie to director Michael Powell. He showed original test footage. Sorry, misspeak. He showed the original test footage of De Niro in the ring, and Michael Powell pointed out that the red gloves were inappropriate for the time period, and they would have been black or burgundy. And that is why Scorsese decided to film the movie in black and white.
That's why?
That's why.
Cool. Yeah. Very whimsical decision.
He figured if the boxing gloves weren't going to stand out, why bother?
Sure.
I don't know. I like that pat answer better than the one that's fleshed out I've seen elsewhere. That was the only time anyone would have seen Jack LaMotta. They would have seen him on TV in black and white.
Right. Do you prefer it personally, black and white?
I do. I think the cinematography of this movie obviously is next level, and the black and white when you want that kind of color contrast, it really is a noir film, and noir always works best in black and white. It just does. Shadows and the way that he plays with light and obviously it would have worked as color, and it's hard to go back and try and reassess whether would a color Raging Bull have worked quite as well.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Now, what was your takeaway here with the stylistic choices when you're watching it for the first time, having known all about Raging Bull? I mean, presumably you've heard about the film.
Yeah.
I know for
sure.
You've known the aesthetics and sort of where it stands in Scorsese's filmography. Now, what did you think about the aesthetics?
The control that Scorsese has over when he shifts point of view. There's these moments where the ring seems like warped and large, and you're looking at it through Jake LaMotta's point of view, and there's times when it feels like this objective sort of roving camera that's just a third party neutral observer. The amount of almost like iconographic dream sequences in the film that just waver in and out, these clips of flashing back to Joe Pesci's wedding, or just montaging Joe Pesci's wedding, the way that the boxing matches go from full-on fight scene to rough montage to still frame to like just close-up images throughout the film. It's a pretty wild. It's pretty beautiful and crazy of an idea, and what it does to you emotionally is really striking. And I think you can know the technical achievements of the film and know the legacy of the film, but the emotional impact of those decisions and just really getting the sense that Scorsese is just going off his gut and saying, well, this is how I feel like it should be. I want to do it this way. Like you can plan for some of that, but you can't plan for some of that. Also, I was really taken by how parts of the movie feel so loose. So some of those scenes with De Niro and Joe Pesci are so loose. They're just so naturalistic and so real and just happening. And some of it feels so tightly controlled. And so finding a director that can do all those things I just mentioned is really impressive. And I don't think that reading about the movie can prepare you for that. So I was kind of like hit by an emotional weight of the film in totality that you just have to see it. Like summaries won't do it justice, and artistic breakdowns of it won't do it justice. But I was really, really impressed by the way the technical achievements work together for a just sheer pointed emotional impact.
You mentioned the size of the boxing ring, And Scorsese was changing the size based on the way the fight was going, so that it's really trying to put you in LaMotta's head. And I think a lot of those stylistic choices, like saying that there's really no method to what he's doing. He said he's just going on instinct as a filmmaker. Like, how do I represent the internal of Jake LaMotta? And he's doing it through the aesthetics of the film. And there's a lot of, I mean, there's some horror movie tricks going on in the way that he does that, like the size of the ring and playing with space. He's really not beholden to any one style here. I mean, you're talking about the naturalistic dialogue and in a boxing movie, so you've got these sporting elements, elements of film noir, horror, neorealism, are all coming in to play within this one film. And it's all about trying to place you in the head of a borderline sociopath.
Yeah.
What are you doing? I just said don't overcook it. You're overcooking it. Bring it over.
You want your steak?
Bring it over. Bring it over. It's like a piece of charcoal. Bring it over here.
You want your steak?
Yeah, right now.
Good. Here's your steak. Can't wait for this to be done?
No, I
Here.
can't wait.
Good. Okay? Happy? Happy?
That's all I want. That's all I want.
Here. No more. There.
You bothering me about a steak, huh? You bothering me about a steak?
Yeah.
Borderline's generous.
Yeah, he doesn't. You know, I was thinking about how to categorize him as a protagonist in a film, and he's really kind of hard to pin down.
Yeah.
I mean, he is a terrible human, but the way he's portrayed in, you know, some of the serial killer movies, like Henry, do some of the same camera tricks to try and place you on that side of the crime. Like trying to explain how and the why, and maybe, you know, you feel some of yourself in this character. You don't, I mean, you're not acting on these impulses clearly, but he wants you to feel that you also can be capable of such violence.
Well, I like transgressive fiction for that very reason. And I should also mention I'm in the middle of watching Sopranos for the first time. I'm almost through season 4. So the idea of unlikable protagonists that you relate to because of the way your brain works, and if you spend time with someone, it's hard not to try to see yourself in them. But I would argue that Raging Bull is not really interested in the why. I didn't see a lot of that in the storytelling in terms of where he came from, and that review that you mentioned that said, you know, the product of his environment. I don't know that Scorsese's making that argument. I don't see that in the film. I see that this is a guy who is the way he is, and the movie is spending time with that person and showing the struggles of being that person. But the idea, like I read somewhere, I got a little obsessed about it, but I read somewhere that in real life, Jake LaMotta's dad would make him and his brother Joey fight for money in the front yard, and that's how he'd pay his rent, is he'd make his kids fight, and neighbors would come place bets, and that's how he'd, you know, pay his bills and stuff. And so that's a why question, and it's telling that that's obviously a very dramatic and traumatic scene in a film that Scorsese doesn't put in, right? So there's so many why questions he leaves out, and I don't think he's that interested in it. I think he's interested in, do you see yourself, sure, in this person, but also this is what humans are. Like, humans are complicated, gross individuals, and there's darkness to us that has been unexplored in cinema up to this point, and that's why I really miss this time in movies. Like, I've started to fall in love with these types of movies. Like, I went and I read the screenplay for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest recently. I went back and watched Five Easy Pieces.
That's the protagonist in there. He's unrepentant. I mean, everything he does is just the way it is.
Well, both of those, and Cuckoo's Nest and Five Easy Pieces. I mean, they're both Nicholson, but like unrepentant. And this is just how I am. And humans are devious and dark and full of complexity, and also what we would call evil. And so, you know, this is maybe jumping ahead in the conversation, but I've come to think, and this is, I'm sorry to film lovers out there, but I've come to think that the rise of morally simplistic narratives, point to Marvel or point to whoever you want in this. The rise of that, I think, is very connected to the sort of destruction or maybe at least dilapidation of our political system. That unless you can see shades of gray, unless you're comfortable dealing with complexity, you have a very hard time dealing with politics, because you're like, well, who's the good guy? I'll be on that team. That's the good team and that's the bad team. And that's as far as I can go down this rabbit hole. Whereas like these movies are really interested in saying, well, no, there's no good people and bad people. There's people who are fucked up. Like there's complexities to people. And that morally neutral gray area is kind of all I want to think about and all I want to write about. And so to see a movie trafficking exclusively in that, more on the darker side than the complex side in certain ways, I just loved it. I love that was how storytelling worked back then, and it made me really sad in some ways about some of the storytelling happening today, on a mass scale. I mean,
the difference was we had the filmmakers that were willing to push it, and the studios who, for some reason, were willing to continue giving them the opportunity to share this work.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know if you've read Peter Biskind lately, but
not recently. I'm gonna go back and reread that book. I've read the book, but fully forgot it.
It's I'm not 100% on the Biskind train, because he places a whole lot of blame on the 80s blockbusters for eliminating the gray area, as you called it. The success of those films completely eliminated the desire for studios to take chances on the smaller ones. And while there's some truth to that, I can't blame Star Wars for destroying Hollywood cinema.
Sure.
The filmmakers themselves had a huge hand in taking down the system that was willing to allow them their speech. I mean, the late 70s, early 80s were just filled with these hugely expensive disasters. Not like disaster Titanic sort of films, but like movies that cost hundreds of millions of dollars that were art films.
Yeah. Heaven's Gate.
Heaven's Gate is the poster child for the destruction of that style of filmmaking. And they were artists, and they believed that everything began and ended with their voice. And they forgot that there was a business involved. And Raging Bull, which came at the tail end of that era, doesn't really qualify. It technically it made money, though I can't imagine it qualified as much, considering that there's still marketing involved. And so 23 over 18 isn't a huge success, but it's not a disaster either. We're not talking about bankrupting an entire studio like Cimino.
Right. There's this quote I remember. I forget who it is. It's a female novelist who I don't remember who said it, but they said that the role of the English teacher is to change the bestseller list. And I think that kept coming up for me, that quote, while I was watching this movie, because I really think that there's a place for both of those types of filmmaking. There's a place for the big budget artistic swings, and there's a place for the very simplistic good guys versus bad guys swing. And I don't want to say that one is necessarily better than the other, but I do think that one speaks more to the qualities of humanity than the other. And one is, gives us what we want, which is this instinctive need to have good triumph over evil, that there's order to the world. And the reality is that the world's very disordered and chaotic. And movies that speak to that are necessary, but they're harder. And so I think that the society we live in would be better if movies trafficked more in moral complexity, and that style of filmmaking hadn't really gone out of vogue. And it's still around. I don't want to say it's not. I mean, we were just talking about American Honey before this. Like, that style of filmmaking in terms of just, people are complex. The end. Like, that's still around. It's just viewers don't really seem to like it as much. Or
we're not seeking it out. And
Yeah.
it's being quarantined in areas that people who want to find it have to go to find it, and people who are perfectly happy not knowing it exists can continue merrily on their way. It's not something like Raging Bull, which was a major studio release.
Right. Well, also what it's trafficking in is people inherently want to be part of the cultural conversation. They want to go to the water cooler, quote unquote, and know what's going on. And now to do that, you have to see Marvel movies. Like, to be part of the cultural conversation, whether you like it or not. If you haven't seen Avengers Endgame and you go into a pitch, people are like, what are you doing? Like, what do you mean you haven't seen? Not that they're saying it's good. They're just like, you have to see it. You just have to see it.
Right, you have to see it. It made $1 gajillion dollars. So if you want to make movies, you need to know why this works.
Exactly. Or just to be in the conversation. Like, if everyone's seen it, you have to see it. And the idea that there was a bit of tastemakers running studios at the time, it felt like, and saying, well, this is the thing that we're going to take a swing on this. And we're going to force it into the cultural conversation, of which I was not a part of until this moment. So please note it did not work on me. But like, there's something to that, I think. And I just finished adapting a book into a screenplay for this guy, and I was just really interested in the moral complexity of it. And there's a need to put a modern narrative to it, which does involve good and bad and triumphing over something, which is just, I guess, in a way, basic storytelling, but trying to infuse things with moral complexity and saying, well, look, people are good and bad and people make bad decisions, and showing us the worst of us isn't always a bad idea. Like, there's something beautiful to that, I think.
And if we keep harking back on the evolution of cinema, but there was even a time as we emerged from the 70s and the new Hollywood filmmakers, some of that carried over into the popular filmmaking. I don't know why this movie came to mind exactly, but you think about a movie like 48 Hours, which it shares some of that, the character, the unrepentant character. I mean, Nick Nolte is an awful human in 48 Hours, but it's placed inside a Hollywood action film. There is just more to it all.
Yeah, that's good. I also think there's a complexity that a comfortability with complexity. And I think, I've been thinking a lot about the segue in American culture from the late 60s to the 80s, about how there was a shot, man. Like the hippies had a shot to remake the government and remake the world, and they lost. I mean, for lack of a nuance in this conversation, but like there was a sense that, well, look, coming out of this Vietnam era, the counterculture took to politics and took to the mainstream and said, well, we got to stop this war in Vietnam. And as such, we're going to also try to infuse the culture with the rest of our politics, which are about loving each other, down with corporations, radical free expression, like all those things that I count as classically human qualities, right?
Yeah.
And they got fucking bounced, man. Like I should ask, can I curse on this podcast? I've been cursing.
Yes.
Great.
We've done that.
Okay, cool. But they got fucking bounced. Like, and the Reaganomics beat them down, and this sort of the corporate takeover, I think, starts in 81, 82, 83, and like persists today. And so you look back at these movies that are struggling to hold on to the vestiges of that idea that humans are complex and we're weird and we have to struggle to be better, and we're not good, and there's not good and evil, there's just fucked up people. Like seeing those artists trying to capture what I take to be a really amazing moment in American history is so wonderful and so depressing to me at the same time.
Now, had you read the Jake LaMotta autobiography before this?
I had not. Okay. I probably will.
It seems like it falls into your transgressive, even if it's not intentionally transgressive. But
yeah, I weirdly like. This is going to sound weird, but I like novels that are transgressive more than I like autobiographies that are transgressive. There's something about the artistic control and the point of the writing and the fabrication makes it feel more, I don't know, beneficial or something to me. Like there's something grosser about reading an autobiography of a bad guy than there is about reading Lolita or, Fight Club or something.
There's probably greater truths that come out of fiction because you're able to tap precisely into these things. Dealing with biography, there's always going to be a fictionalization.
Well, the interesting thing about Jake LaMotta is that he doesn't know why he is the way he is. So he's the last person I want to tell me what he's about. I don't want to know from him. It's not interesting to me. Like, his confusion about why he is the way he is interesting to me. He doesn't want to be the guy he is. He fucking does not want to think that his wife is cheating on him. He does not want to be the guy he is. And this self-flagellation in that Sugar Ray scene is so poignant because he just goes in and gets beat because, for a number of reasons. But one, I would argue, is that he feels like he wants to punish himself. That's interesting. Yep. Like, the why of that, and I don't want to hear his explanation of why he did that because he's almost certainly wrong about it.
And when they were making the movie, he wasn't allowed on set for anything that wasn't a boxing fight because he assisted with the production. But Scorsese wouldn't allow him anywhere near anything that wasn't boxing.
Good. I mean, good. Yeah, I don't want to hear his perspective on what that is. I want to hear Scorsese's perspective on it, you know? And, I mean, there's this other sense of this, which is, have you seen Dragged Across Concrete? Have you seen that movie? Mm. Then I'll use Boondock Saints as my example. I think Dragged Across Concrete, for me, is a better example of this, but movies that unintentionally show you who made them are very interesting to me. Mm-hmm. Like, Boondock Saints is a mess, and we covered it on our podcast. But it's a mess, but it tells you very clearly who made it.
In a place where the violent have the power.
Destroy all that which is evil, so that which is good may flourish.
One lawman doesn't know whether to catch the killers.
I believe what they do is necessary.
Or join them.
All the things I wish I could do, these guys are doing.
With every breath, we shall hunt them down. Each day, we will spill their blood.
There was a firefight!
And there's something really interesting about that to me, of like this unintentional self-revelation that you're doing through storytelling. And there's some of that, I think, with Scorsese here. Like, what he chooses to focus on and what his gut tells him is interesting tells you a lot about that identification with the characters and also like the desperation of where he was at in his life at the time, I think.
Yeah.
Which is awesome.
Well, I think he's clearly seeing himself directly into the Jake LaMotta character's self-destruction.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, the identification is really interesting to me. And it's not linear. It's not a one-to-one, this is a movie about me. But there's moments, I think, where you can argue that he's coming through there. And that's super fascinating to me. And that style of, like, dreamlike's the wrong word, but experimental is the wrong word too. But this sense of, like, floating filmmaking that you see, I don't see that anymore. And this mix of, like, seemingly improvisational scenes with really tightly fucking controlled scenes. It just feels like you're seeing a guy's gut up on screen and you're going on that emotional journey. And for something to be so technically proficient, and I actually just downloaded the script before we started talking so I can read it, but I imagine pretty tightly scripted in most ways. Like the mix of all those things together and a guy saying, cool, I have all these pieces in play and now I'm just going to let my gut go and tell me what's right is awesome. It's so great. You don't see that on a major screen these days.
The screenplay was an interesting, the way that came together. The original Mardik Martin script wasn't workable. They didn't at the time. They didn't have Joe Pesci's character in the film.
Oh wow!
So you have almost no emotional anchor. You only have the LaMotta perspective. You don't have.
So Paul Schrader didn't do the first draft on the script.
No, he did not. Schrader added the Joe Pesci character, the brother.
Great.
In the next draft, and then Scorsese still didn't really feel like it was workable, so he and De Niro hammered out the last details, and that's uncredited because of the Screenwriters Guild. They had to jump through some loopholes, and they said it's not worth it, so they kept their input off of it.
Interesting. That's great. At some point, we have to talk about Joe Pesci. I don't know if you want to do that now or later.
Now it's as good as any. It seemed like a perfectly natural offshoot of the conversation.
I'm telling you now, if I hear anything, I swear on our mother, I'm gonna kill somebody. I'm gonna kill somebody, Joey.
Well, go ahead and kill everybody. You're a tough guy. Go kill people. Kill Vicky, kill Salvi, kill Tommy Como, kill me while you're at it. What do I care? You're killing yourself the way you eat. You fat fuck. Look at you.
What do you mean? I don't understand. What do you mean kill you?
Me. Kill me. Start here. Kill me first. Do me a fucking favor. Because you're driving me crazy. You're a killer. You're a big shot. Just kill. You're a killer.
Excuse me. What do you mean by you, though?
So? What does that mean? Don't mean
but
nothing.
Even you don't even know what you meant by you.
Don't mean nothing.
Joey, that meant something. You mentioned Tommy, you mentioned Salvi, you mentioned you. You included you with them. You could have said anybody, but you said you and them.
You really let this girl ruin your life. Look at you. She really did some job on you. You know how fucking nuts you are? Look what she did to you.
You fucked my wife.
What?
Joe Pesci...
Joe Pesci is the best.
He wasn't even working at the time.
I can't take it. I can't take how good he is in this movie, man. I really can't.
He's incredible. He is.
He's so fully formed out the gate. And I did go on IMDb to see. I was like, he must have been working for decades before this because he's so toe-to-toe with De Niro. He's so effortless. He's so good and fully formed. And I think the only thing he'd really done that was a feature before this was a Goodfellas ripoff, it seemed like, which I assume is where Scorsese saw, not Goodfellas ripoff, Mean Streets ripoff. And he came to this movie and you're like, oh, I'm watching a superstar. I'm just watching the best fucking guy I've ever seen on screen doing the best things. And so effortlessly. I couldn't believe it. I really couldn't believe he was that good.
You're prepped for De Niro. I mean, that's what you know about Raging Bull. If you know nothing else, is that this is De Niro's performance, right?
The winner is Robert De Niro, The Raging Bull.
I forgot my lines, so the director wrote them down for me. I just want to...
That's right. That's exactly right.
And it's Joe Pesci that you can't take your eyes off of. When he's on screen, everything he's doing, the subtleties that he brings to that performance. And like I said, he wasn't working. He was running an Italian restaurant when Martin Scorsese called him.
Fuck.
And it wasn't even Scorsese. De Niro saw him in The Death Collector, which I believe is the movie you're referencing. He saw it on TV 2 years later.
Jesus.
And gave his name to Scorsese and showed him the movie and said, "That's our guy." Out of nowhere.
That's right. I think having not seen this and filtered into the public culture, like, Joe Pesci from Goodfellas, but people don't talk about Joe Pesci in Raging Bull. They just don't, and I don't know why.
I think the performance in Goodfellas is sort of, it's a cultural fixture.
That's right.
It's just the bravado of that performance, the largeness.
Yeah.
And this is not that Joe Pesci. This is a far more controlled performance. This is many levels of emotion. I mean, the way he deals with his brother, like he's clearly seeing this as he's a project. Like he's got to shepherd this man through life.
Yeah.
And he just can't. He can't do it.
Yep. That's exactly right. And the size difference he's always made work for him. But the idea that you can see some of the rage that Jake LaMotta has in him, in his brother. You can see it. It's there. It's just a wonderful counterpoint to how he's controlled that and made something of that. And those scenes, like in the club where he bashes that guy with the glass, like, you're like, oh, there's the guy. Okay, that's the fire I've been seeing simmering under the surface the entire movie, and they let it loose for a second. And I was like, thank God they did that, because it just makes the character make so much sense. Like, this is a guy possibly with the same amount of rage issues and problems that Jake has, but just controlled. Just he's made something of himself. He's figured it out, and Jake can't figure it out. And that counterpoint is such a wonderful thing. But I can't think of any other actor in the world in history who could have done it that way. There's just no one else. Like, he's such a idiosyncratic guy. I love him. I love him so much.
And Home Alone too. I mean, you just left out the biggest one.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, there's that. I mean, he's a hard actor to cast, so he's gonna take what he can get. but there's this type of movie suits him. Like this Scorsese type of film suits Joe Pesci because he is like, where else do you get this like small, tightly coiled ball of rage that's so unafraid and so confident?
And in a way, he's playing a character that's so tied into New York culture.
Yeah.
And that's I mean, Scorsese knows this guy on a very intimate level, like how to use Joe Pesci, the characters he's playing.
You got it. Oh, you got it, man. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Scorsese's probably the last guy who knew how to play the instrument the right way, so to speak.
I mean, nobody's ever really gotten the same out of Joe Pesci.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're right. It's those characters are built for him. Those types of movies are built for him. Yeah, maybe it's more Scorsese than the type of movie, actually. Maybe you're right.
You mean, let me understand this, because maybe it's me, I'm a little fucked up, maybe. But I'm funny how? I mean, funny like I'm a clown, I amuse you?
That's cool. Yeah, I thought he was fucking great, man.
When you think of like 8 heads in a duffel bag, you're not getting the same Joe Pesci.
Yeah, that's not the same.
That's not the same Joe Pesci.
Well, you also get like people saw the comedic elements of Joe Pesci. They forget that the comedy in those early films only works because you're scared of him. Like it's funny, like the "You Think I'm a Clown" scene in Goodfellas. That's funny because you're terrified. He's so scary in that scene. And I think if you remove the menace from that performance or that character, it's just kind of a joke. It's kind of funny because he's short or whatever, like, and kind of has a weird voice. Like, it's not the same thing. The menace, I think, is what makes all of that comedy play.
Yeah, and it comes from so many different elements, too. I mean, you're talking about the size and the tenor of his voice, but it's also the cadence of his language. The way he spits that dialogue. I mean, you can tell he's unhinged. And that's what makes you afraid of those characters. If someone who, I mean, even say you give those lines of dialogue to someone who's physically imposing, it's not going to register the same way because you've seen that delivery hundreds of times, like the big imposing bully. That's not as frightening as this guy who you can literally not tell what he's going to do to you.
Yeah, he's got that glint in his eye.
He survived this long, and you're wondering how.
Yeah, you must have done some. He's got that big dick energy. He's just really like, he's really got something under the surface that you're like, what is that thing? How he must be insane. Like he must be crazy, and he must be willing to go farther than I will. This like pairing him with De Niro and making them brothers here in this way is such a stroke of genius, actually, the more I think about it, too. Just because the counterpoint of what could have been and how those things manifest, that same energy in a body that can't box, very interesting. Like, very interesting to watch.
Yeah, but the casting, too, just to take a step back, the Kathy Moriarty here.
Sure. What, 16, 17 at this point?
I believe she was 19 when they filmed this. She'd never acted before.
Really?
Really.
Huh.
And in another one of those twist of fates, this I didn't see consensus about how this happened. I read 2 different stories. One was that it was Pesci that suggested. Well, okay, so both have Pesci suggesting her to Scorsese. He either saw her in a picture in a New Jersey disco. It would have been a modeling picture because she, I guess she had been some sort of in beauty contests and things.
Right.
Or he'd seen her in the actual beauty contest, which raises why are you watching a teenage beauty contest? So I'm going to go with the picture in a disco.
Yep. Let's just say that's the case.
Right. But she had not acted other than in high school plays.
Wow.
That is it. And they credit her inexperience to just being thrown in there among De Niro and Pesci and holding her own, because she's wonderful in this movie.
She's wonderful. Those series of seduction and romance scenes between her and De Niro I really haven't seen anything like it. Like, I love it. I love that, because on the page, it doesn't do what it does on screen. And it reminds you that Scorsese is such a visual filmmaker, but the first sequence where he's like, I'm gonna move your chair closer, come sit on my lap, come over here, come do, just a series of directives that is not said with kindness or menace. It's this like almost neutral thing where the audience gets to impose what they think he's doing on top of it. But that whole seduction scene is such a trust in the actors and trust in the process and understanding how visual language works. Because on the page, it's like, yeah, it requires a lot of imagination, I think, which a lot of screenplays don't do anymore. And then the seduction scenes, the sex scene, like all of that is so wonderfully complex, I thought.
Mm-hmm. The scene where she's trying to seduce him before the boxing match with Sugar Ray is just, it's a wonderful twist on the typical seduction. How it feels backwards, and also backwards for the character too, who's used to forcefully getting his way, and now he's resisting her.
Yeah, it's great. It's great, and that's the scene where he pours the water down his pants, right? That one?
Yeah, thinking about how that plays in the page, who knows what's being conveyed is thoroughly through those two performances.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. That's why I wonder how much of those scenes are worked out on set or like improvised together, or like, we know that we want this basic thing to happen and just letting the actors go. I didn't research this, but I wonder how much of that is Scorsese just letting magic happen when he recognizes it.
Like, he's such an instinctual filmmaker. It's got to be a whole lot of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I expect that. And I wonder,
especially early on in his career. Wasn't later? I feel less of this sort of gut reaction. I mean, the modern movies are also excellent, and I guess I see some of it in Wolf of Wall Street. There's a lot of similarities between this and Wolf of Wall Street.
Sure,
talking about the character and self-destruction. It's totally different framework, but around that, the other movies feel planned, they feel precise, but this it feels like something. I hate to use the word organic because that's just tossed around about a way of not knowing exactly what to say. But there's a lot. There has the feel of, we're going to put the camera on, and this is what we're going to do. But if it doesn't work, we'll figure it out.
Yeah. I mean, part of it is, I guess, just studio belief in auteurs at the time period, where there's a couple people that they'll let Tarantino do that. He didn't need to do that, but like they'll let him do that, I think, and then a couple other filmmakers. But it was very much in that time period, I think, just a director-writer driven or director-driven medium, where now there's so many in the studio system, man. There's so many pairs of eyes on the script before it goes to filming. Like, there's so many people working on it. There's assets that have to be built before you start filming. Like, there's just a lot more approvals that need to happen, I feel like, where the sense that, like, yeah, these guys probably showed up and figured it out, and they had a small crew and they just made it work. Like, it's pretty rare these days to see that.
I can't think of another filmmaker besides Tarantino that releases major studio films and doesn't have that oversight. I mean, he could use a little more oversight, if I'm being candid.
Yeah, sure. That's a separate conversation. I think there's a couple, but I don't know if they're in the big. Like, I bet you for Knives Out, they let what's his face go.
He's an interesting filmmaker in that respect. I don't know. I get that impression too. And I think that's probably because he seemed to come into an established franchise and have his way with it.
Yeah, I bet for Brick he didn't have that, but I bet you, like, oh, this guy after Brick, they're like, oh, he has a thing he's doing. Let's just let him do his thing. That's cool.
Ryan Johnson. I mean, we probably should say his name, I guess.
I couldn't come up with it, so I'm glad you did.
Yeah.
And I bet by Brothers Bloom, they were like, do whatever you want. So there's a couple people, I think, who are doing it.
And Soderbergh, even though he doesn't admit to
Soderbergh's
doing
great.
anything in particular.
Well, Soderbergh, he's doing it because his budgets are so small. So like he gets away with it because the stuff he does. I mean, I challenge anyone to say they've watched all of Soderbergh's movies because there's ones you don't know about that are just out there that got released. You're like, oh, Soderbergh put out a movie yesterday. That's okay.
Unless you get a hold of his iPhone, I don't think you really have.
Exactly. But like, I think the idea that someone will pair a decent amount of money with someone's particular vision, that you're right about. That seems to have gone away. And I think that when someone has a singular vision, they can do something morally complex that's more personal to them. Whereas if there's a lot of eyes on it, you eventually end up with good versus evil because it becomes homogenized. It becomes this like flattening of it because there's good versus evil are themes that we can all understand. And so multiple drafts, those are the things that get kept, and the sharp edges and the idiosyncrasies tend to get edited away, I think.
I think it might be, the filmmakers might be working in horror. I mean, they seem to, they get a not a large budget, but they're given, $10 million, and they don't have to pay cast. And they seem to be able to work within that constraint.
Yeah, Haunting of Hill House is totally, that guy is totally that thing, like whatever his name is. Like, I think that
Ready or
his
Not
movie,
is the movie I'm thinking of, like recently. Sure. Like that screams of somebody who had a vision and they gave him a small amount of money and said, we don't, figure it out. Whatever you do is not going to break us.
That's right, man. And also I think just because horror devotees are a lot more auteur-driven.
The horror movies will make $10 million just by opening. Like, it doesn't have to do anything in particular.
I wasn't going to say they were less discerning. I was going to say they were more auteur-driven. But that's also, what you're saying is also true. I think that they just like horror. And I think that it's less of a risk. And I think Blumhouse, obviously built their entire model on that, which is smart. But no, I do think that it's hard to come back from a good versus evil sort of reductive storytelling thing. I think, it's hard to return to complexity once you've gone to simplicity. And I worry that will never make look, First Reformed is great. Paul Schrader's still working. Like, those things are still happening, and that's cool. It's just, you don't really hear about them. Although, at the same time I'm talking, what the fuck am I talking about? Like, Moonlight wins Best Picture. So, like, at the same point, obviously, what I'm saying is false.
No, I mean, there's two different conversations we're having at the same time. We're having financial viability versus artistic success.
Sure.
You can discuss one another independently, but if you're looking at commercial value and the success a movie achieves, that in the eyes of the broader movie-going world, where it matters in the dollar category. I mean, we can talk all you want about standing pat on artistic integrity and the successful movies that didn't make any money.
Sure.
But if they don't make money, they're not going to get released.
But you opened this conversation by saying that Raging Bull was barely a fiscal success, and it took 10, 15, 20 years for it to become, and still, according to your charts, still growing in popularity.
Right.
So who knows? Maybe those movies that we're talking about become something down the road. Maybe they just stick around. Maybe Moonlight is there in 30. I think it will be in 30 years.
That's another one. I mean, it was a wonderful movie. It had a unique voice. It had something definite it wanted to say. It looks like he said exactly what he wanted to say, and it latched on to something in the critical populace, and I think it resonated with people. I don't think it made a ton of money. I don't have the numbers in front of me. I don't remember it receiving that wide release that it would require to become a so-called financial success. But there's been a lot of those. I think the Academy seems to go in waves where it aims to reward popularity in tandem with artistic success, and it gets in trouble when it tries to do that. But it's always in flux, and who knows what they're going to be thinking about next year. But they're very reactionary.
Well, and also there were fewer movies made back then, so I think that you're seeing more of those niche movies just because there's more people making movies. Anyway, Raging Bull.
Yeah, Raging Bull.
No, it's fantastic. It was one I'm kind of glad I waited for, to be honest with you, just because I don't know that I probably would have been ready to receive it, when I was in my deep transgressive fiction reading phase. I probably would have been ready for it then, but maybe 5 years ago I wouldn't have been ready to think about it the way I'm able to now. I could revisit it and think about it differently, I think. But the last 3 or 4 years of really thinking hard about movies and having this podcast I do, like having that experience of really thinking about movies in a slightly different way allowed me to see how genius all these techniques are, because it feels effortless, but if you have been on sets and made movies, there's an incredible amount of technical skill going into this, and fairly early in his career, given what he's become. Like it's wonderful to see someone that control of the orchestra like that.
I mean, if you could go do a shot by shot for those boxing matches, and I think that would be very illuminating, looking at how he uses space.
All the cuts that you're watching in these fight scenes, all of this has been worked out beforehand on paper. There'll be some supplementary material that you'll actually be able to see some of the storyboards, or at least the overhead plans that I had worked out on paper, and that gave us a master plan to follow in terms of the cutting. Of course, the shots were pretty extravagant at times, and it wound up that we had 5 weeks scheduled for the fight scenes, and we wound up shooting them in 10 weeks. And there's only about 9 or 10 minutes of actual fight footage in the entire picture.
Yeah.
I mean, the technique in those scenes alone, I mean, not the rest of the movie too, but if you wanted something that stands outside the rest of the movie because it is so stylized versus that realism that he's grounding in the familial.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much to dig into there. But yeah, it is one of those movies that I'm not sure. I watched it when I was 16 for the first time, I think. It was right when I got, I got a car, and I got, cards to like 3 different movie rental places. And I was devouring everything I could get my hands on. And it was one of those movies I knew about and knew I needed to watch. And I liked it because I was supposed to like it at the time.
Got it.
I couldn't have spoken about why it resonated with me or why I liked it. It was unusual. The black and white cinematography was something that stood out for me, and like, oh, this is a wonderful choice. I couldn't explain why I thought that, but I appreciated it as an outlier, perhaps because that's why they did it. They didn't want to be Rocky II or The Champ. Yeah. It seems callous to say, oh, it was black and white because it didn't want to be those movies, and that's how it pitched it, but it really did work on me.
Yeah. And it wasn't those movies. Like
also, face value, it wasn't those movies.
He needed a way to say that, I think, to people, and I think that's a really cool. That almost feels like a gut decision as well. Of like, it just feels like the right thing to do,
right? And
we'll do it because all the reasons you gave sound like maybe that's true. Maybe the glove story is true. Maybe like all that stuff is true. But like just the idea that. It's not this. It's something more artistic. It's not about boxing. It's about a guy. Like, how do I tell people it's about a guy? And I don't want boxing fans to come here and be disappointed. Well, we'll make it black and white. Like, it just immediately tells you where you're at because of the tropes of black and white film about art films and history and old films and stuff. Like, it's really smart. It tells you right out the gate what it is, but also it does, like you said, subtly psychologically work on you in a weird way.
What if you took the boxing scenes out of the film? How would you think that would change the overall message?
I think you need to see the brutality. I really do. And because here's the thing. You can't see him beat the shit out of his wife if you haven't seen him in a boxing ring. I think those are messages that need to coexist. That he lives in a world of brutality.
I think that's a balance too. The professional and personal. And it's without this socially sanctioned brutality, he is just a monster.
Yeah.
And that's not something that you can digest. But because you see him in the boxing ring, and this is something we've all seen boxing, at a certain point we've all taken an interest. I mean, as children of the 80s, we had Mike Tyson, and I know I watched all those fights. Like, I didn't care about boxing, but you watched it for that spectacle, and he was also a monster.
A huge monster, absolutely. Yeah.
But without that, I mean, he is just horrible.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying he's not just horrible with the scenes, but it does something psychologically to the way you watch the movie.
100%. And the beauty of the violence there is the way it's shot is interesting to me. And also you would lose the one of the central metaphors of the film, I think, which is a guy whose secret superpower is that his head is thicker than other people.
Yeah.
He can take more abuse than everyone else, and that's his superpower. Like, what a fucking brilliant idea for a character to talk about how society works on a person like that. Like, the movie goes out of its way to say he's got small hands, he's not that strong. He's not
a good boxer. He just takes more beatings.
Yeah, and he wears out people by beating him up. But the people beating him up get worn out by hitting him.
I always thought it's a fascinating profession to be a boxer, which like reduces life down to its most basic element. You know, your job is to go and hit somebody, and then they hit you back. That's what you go out and you do in the morning. You come back, and I mean, it's as primal as you can get, I think, in quote civilized unquote world.
Like, that is a wonderful idea for a character, and so fucking emotionally dense and rich as an idea.
Yep.
So without the boxing scenes, you lose the visceral impact of exactly what that means. What does it mean that your superpower is to take abuse? Because all of a sudden, his fights with his wife take on a different import. Not just the physical fights, but like the emotional fights. And the fights with his brother is that he's provoking his family, those who love him the most, into hating him because he knows his superpower is taking abuse. Like the way it all works together, it almost feels impossible to sculpt in the way it's done. It almost has to be a gut instinct about what it means to only know taking abuse. It's pretty magical that way.
So true. I think that's a good point to stop at. That means it's time to play this brand new Cinema Shame game that I came up with specifically for this podcast.
Terrified.
Right. It is called Less Likeable Than Jake LaMotta, ?
Why did you come? Huh? Did you fuck my brother? Huh?
Get off me, you fat pig!
Did you? Huh?
No! All right.
I will name a character from a movie, and you have to tell me if he is more or less likable than Robert De Niro as Jake LaMotta.
Great game.
Perfect. Willie T. Stokes in Bad Santa.
More likable.
Okay, let's go to related. Rupert Pupkin in King of Comedy.
Oh. Less likable.
Mark Zuckerberg in The Social Network.
More likable. This game is hard.
Alex DeLarge in Clockwork Orange.
I'm gonna say more likable because it's more fantastical. That's the only one I'll caveat. I'll refrain from caveating these.
Okay. Sam Witwicky in The Transformers.
Less likable than Jake LaMotta. For sure.
Edward Cullen in The Twilight Saga.
Never saw Twilight Saga.
You can just guess.
I'm gonna guess.
Just imagine them sparkly.
No, I'm gonna guess more likable. Okay. Fuck you guys. He's probably great.
This one's very specific. Anakin Skywalker in Attack of the Clones.
Oh, in Attack. Okay, so Attack of the Clones.
Specifically Attack of the Clones.
Oh, more likable in Attack of the Clones because he's so sad and pathetic in Attack of the Clones. I felt nothing but bad for that guy. And if you can evoke pity, then you like them more, just by definition. So he evoked my pity throughout the entire film.
Yeah. Okay, Howard the Duck.
More likable.
In Howard the Duck. I don't know if you needed me to finish that sentence.
I didn't, but no, more likable. More likable.
Could have been Howard the Duck in
the new
Guardians.
One. Oh, sure. Yeah, but they had a new Howard the Duck movie coming out, right? Allegedly?
Allegedly.
Oh, yeah, that'll never happen.
I'll believe it when I see it.
Yeah, same.
How about Scarlett O'Hara and Gone with the Wind?
I gotta say more like. I have to. It's the only female you've mentioned so far.
I have some more, but the problem with the female characters is there's a dearth of them, and when they are in the same category, they're normally serial killers.
Yeah, you're talking about Eileen Wuornos?
That was on the list.
Sure, I get it.
I kind of have to believe, just by the nature of their profession, we'll call it in the movie, that they have to be less likable. I mean, he didn't really kill anybody in Raging Bull. But...
I think Eileen Wuornos, I mean, the movie certainly asks you to relate to her more than Raging Bull asks you to relate to Jake LaMotta.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to get beyond the killing part.
Is it?
Maybe.
You need to grow up, man.
All right.
That's the world we live in.
Let's see. How about Forrest Gump?
Oh, good question. Look, saccharine movies work on me. I'm going to say more likable, but I am partial to the opposite response. I understand the opposite response.
Napoleon Dynamite.
More likable! You guy rules.
I'm not so sure about that one.
You film buffs love to hate on this movie, and it's fine.
Oh, okay.
It's made by Mormons for $1 in a small town. Who cares? Let them be weird. That's what I say. Let them be their weird selves.
My history with Napoleon Dynamite is I have good friends who I generally believe everything they say when it comes to movies, and they were like adamant. This is right after Napoleon Dynamite came out, and they're adamant I had to see it. I'm gonna love it.
Here's the problem. I get it, but you cannot judge fish by fish fans. The thing is...
Oh, good lord, we've gone there.
Sometimes work exists independent of those who like it, and that's okay. That's okay.
I don't think I laughed once. I sat there staring at it. I looked over at my wife and said, "What? Why?"
Look, I can't speak to your being dead inside. I can't.
I know it happens. I am a little bit dead.
Yeah, I mean, if someone would have said,
I do like Monkey Bone though. Is that?
That counts a little bit. Did you like Nacho Libre?
Oh, I did kind of like that movie.
Weird. You're so weird, man.
I'm not going to say that I defend it in any forum.
Okay.
I did hate it. It was there.
Yeah. I didn't have any prep going into Napoleon Dynamite, so I felt like, fine. I was like, yeah, it's pretty good.
Alright. Here's one that seems like a natural segue. How about Mr. Yunioshi in Breakfast at Tiffany's?
Yeah, less. Well, can you separate the actor and performance from the character?
I don't think that's the way it works.
Maybe there's a humanity to the character that the filmmakers chose not to describe. As a character, probably less likable. As a cultural construct, less likable.
Right. I've got one more here.
Okay, I'm ready. I'm ready to pass this test.
Derek Vineyard in American History X.
Again, for the same reasons as Monster, I would say more likable because the movie wants you to understand him more.
I think that's fair.
That's the Ed Norton character, right?
Yes.
So okay. Yeah. Then yes. Then more likable, even though
because if it's Edward Furlong, you already know the answer.
Exactly.
It's unfair to put any Edward Furlong character in.
Floppy hair equals likable. I also wanted to make sure you weren't trying to trick me, so I feel good about it.
No tricks here.
I don't know, man. Tricky guy.
I thought the Sam Witwicky question was.
Well, we also were talking about Shia LaBeouf in American Honey, and so I feel split on that guy. I feel so torn about that guy.
All right. How about Mutt in Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull?
Oh, less likable than everybody. Less likable than everybody as a character. Great. I think I passed that test.
I think so. It's good enough for me.
All right. I'm going to claim victory just because there's no points, which means I'll take it.
I think you need to You need a badge or something you can wear to your pitch meetings.
That's right. I passed the film test, the more likable film test. Yeah, I do best in games without scores.
Well, that's a skill. It's certainly on the same wavelength as taking more punishment than anyone.
That's why I relate to Jake LaMotta. I get it. I am also good at taking abuse. Well, to be a writer in Hollywood, you get very good at taking abuse. So I think there is an identification with the character that my superpower is taking abuse. So I get it.
That's wonderful. I think that's a nice little shout out to writers everywhere.
Yeah, represent, guys. Yeah. Your superpower is getting beat down and standing up again.
Still being alive.
Never give up.
The suicide thing hasn't become more attractive.
Exactly. Yeah, and yet you didn't die. Keep it up.
Good job.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you survived another year. You're making it in Hollywood. That's how it works.
All right, that was a wonderful conversation. Do you have any other news or business you'd like to thrust upon our listeners who might not be familiar with you?
Thrusted. I would say thrust. I would say thank you for having me on. This is wonderful and long awaited, and also good to reconnect with an old college friend. Yeah. Let's plug the YouTube video of The Shepherd, season 1 through 4.
Oh, absolutely.
That feels important to do.
In their original VHS turned digital turned VHS glory.
Put that in the liner notes.
Oh, turn back to digital.
Turn back? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because I had to digitize and to put it back up from the original tapes. Yeah.
Fucking crazy. Yeah. Put that link in the liner notes. That's a funny thing.
And it looks as good as you'd expect.
Yeah, it's incredible. Obviously, great special effects. Does Your Favorite Movie Suck podcast? I do it with my writing partner Kaylin Egan, and it's fun and weird, and we revisit great movies from the 80s and 90s that actually might suck and look at them through the lens of nostalgia. And then Twitter and Instagram, Travis Sentell, TravisSentell. That's it.
That's too easy, Travis Sentell.
Yeah. I got my name. In it. I'm happy I did.
That's probably better than me.
What is your?
I went cagey. Mine is 007 Hertz Rumble, which is actually a derivation of 30 Hertz Rumble, which is the podcast, my original blog. That's right. BL-G because I believe in reverence. And
you have one of those handles I always look at and go, who is that? Oh, right. Yeah. Every time I'm like, yeah, okay, right.
And originally I just had, and then when I took over the Bond thing, when I became oddly enough became a Bond expert online thing, I was just able to write about them competently, and then I became an expert after the fact. That's when I then spun the 007 Hertz Rumble Twitter account from that as the live tweet account. And then I ended up with like 3 times more followers just because I was live tweeting James Bond movies than my original Twitter handle. See, this is very informative. I'm sure all the listeners are really excited to hear this
no,
story.
I'm pretty into how this works. You can cut this if you like, but I also think I am interested in it personally.
And so I just left it as, I was going to use that one since, I'm speaking to like 3,000 people versus 400.
Yep.
So
these are the whims and vagaries of the internet, man. This is how things happen.
And now I worry that if I actually make it my name, or I would have to use James David Patrick, because I think I have that one. I just don't use it. But if I swapped it, then it's like, why? Who are you? This is pointless.
Are you in a union of any type for writers?
No.
Okay, if you join a union, you're gonna have to make a real decision.
Fuck those guys.
If you do,
outsiders for life.
I'm telling you, if you do, then you're gonna have to go by that handle on the internet. It's gonna mess your life up. So don't join a union.
Okay. I'll not be successful.
Yeah, the anti-union podcast. There we go.
David Lynch doesn't a pinch, but I'll take Wells to ring my bells. Alice Stone's got the bone to pick with Jones about to loan. What Ethan Cohen without knowing lent the feet to old Ang Lee who called Gilly Young a silly one and dashed around at Gus Van Zandt. Gave young Quentin about the van, but Tarantino, evil Sino, then they the sky. Well, he tied the knot on Spike Lee's yacht, wearing white while from him night. His old Prince Lang softly sang, and sent soft looks to Mel Brooks, who was throwing rocks at Howard Hawks, hiding in a hole with Cohen Joel, which was hot as a burner, thanks to Werner. Hot as a burner, thanks to Werner. Hot as a burner, thanks to Werner. Who Stealing Joe Menfo Truffaut had hit the hood of C. Eastwood, that well-known meanie who, like Fellini, thought absurd. Soderbergh's claimed that famous Harold Ramis was the greatest director in the history of cinema.
You have chosen wisely.